There's something magical about the immersion of gaming in a simulated 3D space. The era of VR has made that much more accessible, and in some cases it's hard to go back, especially when you add in one-to-one motion control that feels like you're actually reaching out and grabbing things. It's amazing. But it hasn't always been like that. The 3DS wasn't quite as immersive, but at the time of its release it was the closest most people could get, and the games that truly took advantage of its features were like nothing you could experience before or since. It's also still one of the only examples of glassesless 3D in any media, much less gaming. That's what makes the Nintendo 3DS so special still. A lot of its games just aren't possible without the innovations that system provided. But that also makes it a hard system to discuss in a video like this. So, here we are, back again with my top 7 favorite 3DS games. But it comes with the caveat that what you see on screen and what I experienced might not always totally match. Just like how I can show you footage of VR, but you don't really get the experience until you're in it. Especially since my footage is kind of shrunk down because of the resolution of the Oculus Quest. That's why it's tough to cover these types of games, and why I worry about it from a preservation standpoint in the future. But that's a topic for another day. So, we're using the same criteria for these games as in the last video, and if you don't know what those are, you probably shouldn't have jumped into part 2 yet. I do admittedly regret these restrictions a little because I am always looking for excuses to talk about Majora's Mask, but that's what Zelda Month is for, so I don't have long to wait. And speaking of not long to wait, let's jump right into the first game. Well, 8th game, I guess, technically. First game of this video, you know what I mean.
Mario Kart 7.
Mario Kart 8 is fantastic. We all know that. It's so good that Nintendo decided to just put out again on the Switch instead of making a new one for that system. But what you might not realize is that a lot of what makes Mario Kart 8 great was established in this surprisingly ambitious 3DS title. Nintendo has innovated with every new Mario Kart game. 64 brought 4-player multiplayer, DS brought online connectivity even when only one person owns the game, Wii brought bikes and bad motion steering. I'm not a big fan of that game, but Mario Kart 7 felt like a real game changer as it drastically changed up the status quo for the series. It brought back variable speed in the form of coin pickups in the levels, a feature previously only in the SNES and GBA titles, and it changed up the items quite a bit, notably removing the fake item block and adding a few iconic items like the Fire Flower. The biggest change, though, is the addition of kart transformations and, therefore, customizable kart options. Maybe they took a page out of the Sonic Racing Transformed book, or maybe they just thought it would be fun, but the ability to glide off gaps and drive underwater pretty drastically changed the way they were able to design levels, and the game is better off for it. Sure, there's something questionable about how the characters are able to drive underwater with just the addition of a tiny propeller. Like, wouldn't their engines stall? Wouldn't they drown after a while? Doesn't matter. It's cool and introduces some clever alternate paths to take in various levels. Similarly, the game brings back the trick boosts off ramps from Mario Kart Wii, but with the addition of the glider you can actually use that speed boost to get more air and reach different parts of levels, or grab extra items and coins. And many of these new levels are some of the best in this series because of how dynamic these new mechanics allow the level designs to be. A few of my favorites sadly haven't been seen since, despite a surprising number of 3DS tracks making it into Mario Kart 8 and its DLC, so I want to specifically shout out Shy Guy Bazaar and this game's Rainbow Road. They both just ooze atmosphere. Shy Guy Bazaar has a pretty unique kind of Arabian Nights aesthetic, complete with Shy Guys on flying carpets, which I guess harkens back to their first appearance in Mario 2. So that's a really nice touch, and a great inspiration for a level themed around them, which I don't think they had before this game. Anyway, this game's obligatory Rainbow Road also feels super unique. I guess it's mostly inspired by Mario Galaxy, but it's hard to say. Unlike most that are just generic jaunts through space, this one actually has you leaving the road to drive on the planets themselves, and the gravity feels different when you glide around. It's little touches like that that really set the tracks in this game apart. Even the tracks that are in basically every game, they found a way to still make stand out here. It's real good. Although again, it does slightly concern me that they just built a racetrack so close to the solar system. Like, that kind of outside influence can't be good for the gravitational pull of the planets. I think Mario seriously underestimated the damage this could cause. Or maybe I just need to stop overthinking the logistics of Mario Kart. Speaking of space, though, why did Rosalina get stuck with a generic ice world when there's this space level right here? I take it back, this game sucks. Seriously though, one of my only real complaints about this game is that Waluigi isn't in the playable roster, even though his pinball track made it into the game. How is that fair? I need my purple lanky boy.
Harvest Moon, a new beginning.
This, I believe, was the last proper Harvest Moon game, because Marvelous, the original developers, switched over to Story of Seasons after this game, and Harvest Moon, as a series, became a shadow of its former self from then on, and still. But, let me tell you, they went out strong. At first glance, this is just more Harvest Moon, which in itself is hardly a bad thing. But despite starting deceivingly slow, the game eventually opens up and gives you an overwhelming amount of things to do. Aside from the Harvest Moon staples like planting crops, caring for animals, and finding love, this game also introduces a dense crafting system for basically everything you need in the game. Gone is the big open field full of weeds and rocks. Now you craft plots of land to put your crops in, as well as water-filled paddies for certain crops that need more moisture. Gone is the blacksmith to upgrade your tools and your house. Instead, you craft the superior versions using the proper supplies and build your own home improvements. This is all a byproduct of the game's title, A New Beginning. You are basically tasked with revitalizing a town that's been lost to time. So, you're given a series of tasks to complete that encourage more people to move in, such as building different styles of houses around the town to entice a specific business, such as the inn or a doctor. And you're also asked to beautify the town so more regular people will want to move in, which plays into the marriage element as more eligible bachelors and bachelorettes will move in as you go. This can be annoying because you might have already wooed someone without knowing that there's a better option who hasn't moved in yet, but hey, that's life. Maybe don't show this part of the video to my wife. Long story short, basically everything on your farm and in the village can be moved, added to, improved, whatever. The amount of creativity is staggering. In some ways, this game feels more like Stardew Valley because of how much more nuance there is to the farming and crafting than in past Harvest Moon games. You can also build bee houses and raise them for honey, craft logs to grow mushrooms on, gather bugs from the surrounding wilderness. There's so many different ways to make money and gather crafting materials. This also means that it's very easy to get very rich, but considering some of the crafting costs, you need the money. The exploring itself also feels more dynamic thanks to multiple paths through the outskirts of town, and new areas that unlock as you complete story objectives, along with a jump button that can take you to shortcuts, hidden areas, etc., all filled with things to collect. On a related note, one change I don't really like is that they turned the mine into kind of a boring room with a few mineral deposits that you just mindlessly hit a few times a day for random resources and then leave. But the mine was never really the most interesting part of these games, so it's not that bad. The sheer variety of stuff to do elsewhere in the game more than makes up for it. Also, you can have a cat. Look at how fluffy it is! You're a good kitty, Mochi. I love you. Also, here's my wife, I guess. She's the blacksmith's daughter. She's pretty cool, but I mostly picked her because she was available from the start. Anyway, I know the art style of this game doesn't really do it any favors. It looks kinda off compared to other Harvest Moon games, but the more realistic graphics and detailed character portraits, mixed with the enhanced focus on crafting and exploring, really makes this feel like a more mature Harvest Moon game for people that grew up with the series, like me. The fact that it's also a passing of the torch from Marvelous makes it have a special place in my heart. It's real good, y'all. Now look at Mochi. So cute.
Mario and Luigi, Dream Team.
There's a lot of Mario and Luigi games on 3DS, but this is the first and also the best. At its core, it's just another Mario and Luigi game. It doesn't pack on any major gimmicks like juggling way too many buttons in combat due to having 4 characters instead of 2, or the brothers going all magic school bus inside Bowser's colon while you spend a weird amount of time playing as him instead. This is just the titular Mario and Luigi, off on another wacky RPG adventure. Oh, except sometimes Luigi goes to sleep and the brothers have to dive inside his dreams to change elements of the world in order to progress. And when you're in Luigi's dreams, everything is kinda weird. The game becomes a side-scroller, and Mario fights battles alone, using Dream Luigi to power up his attacks and special abilities. Also, Dream Luigi can interact with elements of the levels to assist the pair in really interesting new ways. So yeah, I guess that's a pretty major gimmick, but it's one that enhances the game. Plus, it puts Luigi in more of a star role, and as a little brother myself, I will always shout out the little brother in the lead. The main thing I love about this game over any of the other Mario and Luigi games is this unique dream mechanic, as it makes for some really dynamic traversal in the 2D side-scroller sections, since I wasn't really a big fan of that element in Bowser's Inside Story. The battle system is pretty much the same as past games, but enemies explore the space a little bit more, sometimes coming in from the background, top screen, wherever, and the abilities you use in combat work similarly, integrating both screens and gyro aiming to mix things up. You still time attacks and dodges, and you still have to figure out the enemy attack patterns in order to avoid a lot of damage, but the Mario & Luigi series has never been one to mess with the status quo as much as, say, Paper Mario. Play Origami King, you cowards. It's a good game. Who cares if it's not just like Thousand Year Door? One of the craziest new mechanics, though, and one that the 3DS hardware can barely handle, is when Luigi embiggens himself and Mario rides him like a Pacific Rim Jaeger. You literally have to turn the 3DS on its side and have a kaiju battle against whatever boss you're fighting. The traditional battle mechanics are thrown out the window as you switch between jump attacks, hammer smashes, and special bro moves that have a cooldown after use, cause little Mario gets tired. The scale of these encounters is insane, considering this is a handheld game, and I love all the little details, such as seeing the normal-sized levels shrunk down in the foreground and background as you fight. It really sells not only the size of these mad lads, but also the 3D effect. I'll admit, these battles can get a little tedious after a while, but they don't happen often enough to overstay their welcome, so they just feel like a nice third-act fight in an action movie. The rest of the game is fairly standard Mario & Luigi fare, though. If you've liked other entries in that series, you'll almost certainly like this one. I think it feels most like the original game, while still evolving it with fun and unique gimmicks that don't overwhelm the player. And, at worst, it's still way better than Partners in Time, so there's that.
Kirby, Planet Robot.
Kirby was a little oversaturated on the 3DS, strangely, with tons of ports, digital-only spin-offs, and more. So when Planet Robobot first came out, I pretty much ignored it. I had tried Triple Deluxe, and that was mostly just boring, and this one looked basically the same visually. I'm glad I gave it a try eventually, though, because this is easily one of the best Kirby games ever made. For one, it's just brilliantly designed with the 3DS in mind, and I love how much the levels send you back and forth between the foreground and background. It reminds me of what the old Virtual Boy Wario game tried to do, and that's honestly the only Virtual Boy game I think deserves any credit, despite the headache-inducing visuals. But also, this is the first time in years I feel like a Kirby game has had any level of difficulty. Probably since Kirby 64, honestly. And to be clear, it's not even close to being a hard game, but it understands how to place obstacles in the way and makes levels fun and dynamic. And some of the secret collectibles are actually hidden pretty well and require some forethought to be able to obtain. There's also some really great multi-stage boss battles that are still fairly easy because of Kirby's overpowered copy abilities, but at least they're interesting and diverse, unlike just another Wispy Woods boss fight. On that note, this whole game actually has a really unique feel for a Kirby game because of the whole concept of it being a group of evil robots landing on Popstar and trying to turn everyone into robotic servants. It's a bold and different direction, and it makes for some really interesting visuals in the levels, since you're basically invading the various ship hubs of the larger robot vessel, so everything is mechanical and electrified. This also leads to this game's gimmick, the titular Robobot. Robobot. Whatever. Say it how you want. When Kirby climbs into his mech, he gains a few unique abilities such as being able to turn cranks, lift large blocks, and interact with other electrical elements of the levels. But the robot can also copy enemy abilities to further enhance his abilities, and while the sections are usually limited to use a specific power-up needed to solve the puzzle, there's still really cool spins on the usual Kirby abilities, and mix up the gameplay loop, allowing for platforming puzzles that wouldn't normally be possible. While this isn't quite the same instant classic as games like Kirby Superstar or Kirby 64, and I think it could have done something more interesting with the abilities themselves. There's a lot of them, including some weird new ones like Poison and Circus that I didn't find terribly useful, but I prefer the old days of quality over quantity in regards to his power options. It's also worth a brief mention that aside from the main story mode, there's a few small mini-games included too, which is pretty common for Kirby games. They're not great, and both modes have been turned into standalone digital titles since this game that flesh them out a little more, but they are a fun side diversion. Especially the Hero Quest one, where you can level up different versions of Kirby in boss rush style missions with friends. Like I said, this is done better as a free title on Switch with more abilities available, but it's still fun to play around with some different ability sets in a beefier combat setting, since most Kirby enemies can be killed with a stiff wind. Or a stiff suck, I guess, more specifically. Stiff suck. What? I made it through almost an entire Kirby game review without any suck or blow jokes. Give me this one. Anyway, if you underestimated this game like I did, definitely give it a try. It makes great use of the 3D environments despite being a side-scroller game, and it evolves the Kirby formula in some really fun and clever ways. Also, finding all the secrets in each level adds a welcome challenge to an otherwise easy game to beat. It's also one of the best looking 3DS games out there in my opinion, with a ton of little details in each level. I can assure you, this game definitely sucks. Okay, I lied, but that's 2. I'm done.
Metroid Samus Returns.
I know some of you may be crying foul since this is technically a remake of Metroid 2 rather than a game original to the 3DS, but for one, I will always include Metroid games. Always. There's not enough of them, and the ones we have don't get enough love. So let me have this. And secondly, this game is so far removed from the original Metroid 2 that it might as well be its own game. About the only thing they have in common is the basic map structure and the fact that you're committing Metroid genocide. And the genocide part arguably holds the game back, because it separates the typical non-linear exploration of Metroid games into different areas. So while those areas are still pretty open and free-roaming, you get a hard stop of getting all the upgrades and killing all the Metroids before you're allowed to move on. But anyway, nitpicks and excuses aside, this game is fantastic. I had been deprived of new Metroid for so long, I was grinning ear to ear the whole time I played through this the first time. But it was also one of those games where as soon as I beat it, I got sad and wanted to jump back in for more. It evolves Samus' moveset in fantastic ways through the use of new abilities, like a melee counter that briefly stuns enemies and sets them up for devastating attacks. This is especially useful during the plethora of Metroid battles in the game. There's also a set of Aeon abilities, such as one that scans the terrain around you and highlights breakable blocks, hidden items, etc. This is especially useful, as the map in Samus Returns is arguably the weakest part of the game, with a lot of unnecessarily large caverns and a lot of samey looking corridors connecting the various areas. Now that there's a constant map on the bottom screen, it's not that big of a deal, but I can't imagine how anyone beat this game on the Game Boy. I'm sure that's what led to the more linear approach, but here it just feels kind of bloated. Luckily, this game also introduces one of my favorite Metroid power-ups ever, the Spider Ball, so that helps to explore some of those large areas since you can just cling to the ceiling and map out the rooms. This game also moves pretty quickly, with each new area naturally leading you to a steady stream of power-ups that give you access to each of the Metroid chambers, so you're never exploring aimlessly for too long. And while the art style of the game doesn't really do it any favors, it looks better on the 3DS's lower resolution, but doesn't upscale well like some of the other games on this list. I love all the attention to detail with the very alive feeling backgrounds, and how it makes the game feel like a 3D world, even though you're only exploring on a 2D plane. I'll admit, this will never be my favorite Metroid game, mostly because there's just not enough to mix it up from the Metroid genocide grind. Though a few new bosses like the Diggernaut are fantastic. But it's still a welcome inclusion on the 3DS, especially since there's still no hint of when another 2D Metroid game might be coming. Watch my video on what direction a new game might go.
The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds.
I've been fairly vocal over the years about how I don't think Link to the Past is the amazing game most fans make it out to be. And while I appreciate its legacy, when I first heard they were making a sequel for the 3DS, I was a little confused. The new flat Link gimmick was intriguing, but I wasn't sure how closely it was going to stick to the Link to the Past, and some of that game's quirkier elements. Naturally, I still got it at launch though, even got the special edition 3DS bundle because, of course I did, it's beautiful. And wow, were my fears of it being another Link to the Past unfounded. I mean, to clarify, it really is. It feels like they tried to make a modern remake and then shifted focus halfway through to make a new game instead. The overworld layout is fairly similar, the dungeons are mostly in the same places, things like that. But basically every issue I had with Link to the Past is fixed or at least better in this game. I have a plan, one of these days, to do a proper comparison of these two games. Maybe for Zelda Month. We'll see. I've been holding on to this Link to the Past footage for a while now, after all. But, as one example, even the worst dungeons in Link Between Worlds are still noticeably improved over their Link to the Past counterparts. Specifically Skullwoods. Ugh, I hate that stupid dungeon. And it's still bad, but not as bad. I don't want to just keep comparing the games, though. Similar to Samus Returns, Link Between Worlds is great on its own accord, not just because it's a better take on a classic game. The ability to flatten against most walls makes for some really unique puzzles, and drastically mixes up the layout of dungeons. Link to the Past already introduced a lot of elements of verticality thanks to the increased power of the SNES, but this takes it to a whole new extreme and adds even more dimension, if I can make a 3D pun. And I can. The overworld is also largely the same, but they've made it infinitely more interesting to explore by scattering collectible little creatures all over, which create some puzzles on their own as you figure out what items you need to reach each one. These are not just fun though, they're a crucial thing to make Link stronger. One weird thing about this game that I still like is Ravio's shop. So the dungeons themselves don't have the traditional progression items in them, for the most part. You can buy or rent all of them from Ravio instead. When you rent them, they're lost on death and can't be modified. But once you buy them, you can take them to Mother Maya, I think, and for every 10 babies you bring to her, she'll upgrade one of your items. It's a really cool system that encourages you to search every corner of the map, since these upgrades are quite a bit more powerful than the base versions. I could honestly spend a lot of time delving into the nuances of this game. There's so many little things that make it great. But since I'll probably do a deeper dive study on it later, I'll just stick with this. They could have just remade A Link to the Past, and most people would have been happy. Instead, they made a new game that I personally think surpasses the original in every way. The dungeon designs are more interesting with some genuinely fantastic puzzles and better boss strategy. The overworld is similar but has more to do. The upgrade system has a lot of depth, from the power-ups you get in dungeons to the ones you buy and upgrade in order to get around. And the way you can do literally any dungeon in any order opens up a lot of fun options for replayability, even if it means there's really not much of a difficulty spike throughout the game. This is easily one of my top 5 favorite Zelda games, and I hope its legacy lives on just like its older SNES brother.
Super Mario 3D Link.
It might be surprising for me to put a Mario game at the top spot, above both Zelda and Metroid, but I can't help it. This game has a perfect blend of new and classic, combining the A to B level progression of the old 2D Mario games with the 3D level design and platforming abilities of newer games like Mario 64 and Galaxy. This game somehow manages to smoosh those two things together in a way that feels like a delicious peanut butter, jelly, and Mario sandwich. The presentation is simple, with just a series of levels and order split up into multiple worlds that really don't share any set environmental theme or anything, more akin to Mario Galaxy 2 than something like Super Mario World. But I think this works in the game's favor because each new level is a unique idea sandbox to play around in. And since a lot of the levels favor more verticality and 3D manipulation, I think the worlds would feel a little too samey if they stuck to any set environments for each level. You can pretty much guarantee that no two levels will feel too similar, as each one has something new to bring to the table, and frankly has some of the most clever Mario levels I've seen in any game. The water levels are definitely the worst of the bunch, but that's not new to this game. This is still not only one of my favorite 3DS games, but also one of my favorite Mario games of all time. It's the game that convinced me the 3D element of the 3DS wasn't just a dumb gimmick, and I loved it so much that when I originally got it, I just about 100% completed it, which is no easy feat due to the sheer amount of post-game things there are to do after you originally beat the game. It was worth it though. Playing this game is its own reward, and I honestly think it's a better game than 3D World, as that seemed a little too caught up in the multiplayer game, whereas this one is just a very solid and polished Mario platformer. And it's a shame it's not part of the 3D All-Stars collection because it looks beautiful in HD. So there you have it, my personal favorite list of games that originated on the 3DS. Did I originally intend for this top 7 to have 3 Mario games? No, but here we are. I guess it's appropriate though, since it's the guy's 35th anniversary and all. But anyway, what do you think of my picks? Are there any major oversights? There's plenty of 3DS classics I just never played or didn't care for, like Kid Icarus Uprising and the aforementioned Pokemon games, but that's the fun of these lists. Everyone's can be different. Let me know yours in the comments below. I know I say that every time, but the engagement really does help with the video's visibility. YouTube algorithms are ever-changing, and it seems to more heavily weigh comments than anything else now, so the best way to share the love is to chat with me in the comments. That's why I try to focus on video ideas that generate discussion, even if it's just people telling me I suck. I'm tough though. I can take it. Okay, that's a lie. I'm secretly very sensitive and internalize every negative thing I'm told until it eats me alive and keeps me up at night, compounded by my crippling depression and undiagnosed anxiety over severe childhood trauma. That went some places. I'm glad we're at the end of the video because I don't know where to go from here. I'll leave it to a 3D gaming video to reveal the depths of my despair. Man. F 2020, right? Like, what kind of outside... Like, that's like... I wonder if those sound effects are ever going to get old in the bloopers. I wonder who even sees the bloopers. So, you know. Weasley, can you not? You're so loud. Well, if you can't beat them, join them. Let's do this. And you're also asked to beautify the town so more regular people will want to move in, which plays into the marriage element as more eligible bachelors and bachelorettes will move in as you go. In some ways, this game feels more like Harvest... This is Harvest Moon. It feels exactly like Harvest Moon, actually. In some ways, this game feels more like Harvest Moon... Fuck, I did it again. The overworld is also largely the same, but they've made it infinitely more interesting to explore by adding... Blah. Why am I terrible? Who watches this crap? Not me. I'm tired of myself by the time I edit these things. Oh, good grief, I missed it. I think I'm just making a blooper video, not a real video.